Hi friends, welcome to my channel Series Scribe. Today's video is going to be a lengthy video as I'll be showing you on how I created a beautiful coaster using these leftover fabric scraps. In order to sew this coaster, you will need a basic understanding of sewing techniques with a sewing machine. For those who are new to my channel, I want to share a little bit about my passion towards upcycling old clothes and transforming them into something new and meaningful. While I work on sewing fashion waste to accessories and garments, I end up with a lot of tiny fabric pieces. So instead of throwing them away, I love to repurpose them into projects like pet friendly mats, stuffed cushion pillows, and of course these coasters. So in order to get started with the fabric scraps coaster, I will need a backing piece to support all these tiny fabric scraps while I sew them together. I have got this old can fabric from a kid's frock, so instead of throwing it away, I am going to use and repurpose it as the backing for these tiny fabric scraps. This can piece is perfect for giving the coaster some structure while I sew them together. For the next step, we are going to carefully arrange the fabric scraps on top of the can fabric, spreading them evenly. It is important not to use any big pieces of fabric at this point because they can easily cause lumps as we stitch along, and I advise not to use any bigger fabric scraps. So once you have got all the scrap fabrics laid out, make sure to press down gently with your hands and check for any lumps or look for areas where the fabric might not be set evenly. As you can see in the video, I have now spread out all the fabric pieces on the can. Since these fabric pieces are pretty small and they can scatter around easily while we are sewing, so I need to secure them in place before heading over to the sewing machine. To secure these tiny fabric scraps, I am going to take another soft fabric piece and place it over one half of the fabric scraps. This way I can start by sewing the other half first. Now I'll carefully pin everything in place and make sure none of these tiny pieces falls apart while I sew. It's all about keeping things in a place so they don't shift around here and there when we are sewing. So once I have secured one half with fabric pins, now I'll carefully take the whole piece over to the sewing machine and I'll start sewing the other half of the fabric scrap onto the can base, making sure everything stays in place. At first, sewing all these tiny fabric pieces together can be very tricky and time consuming. To make the process smoother, I like to place some support behind and on the sides of my sewing machine, which will help stabilize the fabric base, preventing it from shifting around as I sew. And it will make the whole process much easier and more controlled. From this point on, I'll be spending majority of my time stitching both horizontally and vertically, carefully securing all the tiny fabric pieces in one place. This part can take a little while because I want to make sure everything is locked down properly. I have to be very patient and working through each section until I have stitched down all the major pieces, creating a solid base for the coaster. As you can see in this video, when the threads get cut off due to the tension, this happens because we are working with thicker surface than the usual or regular fabrics. It is really important to note that while sewing these fabric scraps, we should always use a thicker needle to avoid any issues. Personally, I always use a jeans needle when working on projects like these, as it is perfect for handling thicker layers and ensures a smoother sewing process. It took me almost 8 to 10 hours to finish sewing all the scraps together and create the template for the coaster, to put everything together and to make the final product. I must admit that it was a bit of lengthy process, but seeing it all come together at the end made it feel so rewarding. Once I have sewn one half of the fabric scraps, I'll carefully remove the fabric cover from the other half and I'll be sewing the second half as well, making sure everything is aligned properly. After that, I'll go ahead and sew the entire piece together with another round of top stitching, securing all the fabric pieces in place for a finished look. Look at our final output of how these tiny fabric scraps have come together to form one thick fabric piece. It's so amazing to see how these small and tiny fabric pieces that were once scattered or discarded now form a beautiful and vibrant patchwork, almost like an art piece. The combination of multiple layers of scrap fabrics with different colors gives it an added density and texture, which makes it a thicker piece of fabric. It is not the usual fabric we typically work with, and that's where the creativity comes into play. With this sturdy base, we can create all sorts of things like bags, cushions, quilts, or coasters. The possibilities are endless when we add our own artistic flair and imagination to the mix. But for today, I'll be making a coaster with this piece of sturdy fabric. Since the fabric is thicker and tougher to sew through, using the right tools is really essential. A regular needle might not be a good fit for this task, but I always use those denim needles, those thicker ones, when I work on fabric scrap projects like these. Now to turn this into a coaster, I'll take another fabric piece to cover the back of our scrap fabric piece. This additional fabric will provide a clean backing for our coaster. Once I have both fabric pieces ready, our colorful scrap fabric and the backing fabric, I'll cut them into a circular shape. This will give the coaster a neat and uniform look, and the circular shape also adds a nice smooth aesthetic to the design. I used a circular plate to cut the main fabric piece into the perfect round shape. The plate worked as a great template, ensuring that the edges were smooth and even. This really helped create a precise circle for our coaster, giving it a polished and uniform look. Now I'll work on the backing fabric and cut it into the same circular shape as the main fabric. It is important that both pieces match in size so that the coaster looks neat and symmetrical. Once I have both the front and back pieces cut to the same shape, now I'll combine the backing fabric and the main fabric by placing the wrong sides together. This means that the right sides of the both fabrics will be facing outwards. Once we have combined the fabrics, it's time to secure them in place. For this, I'll use fabric clips to hold the circular edges together, making sure they are evenly aligned. Using these clips will prevent the fabrics from shifting around while I sew them. Now to combine the main fabric and the backing, I'll take this to the sewing machine and sew straight line stitches vertically and horizontally, forming box-like patterns across the coaster. Will actually create a quilted look, adding texture and dimension to the piece. If you have made it to this far and enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Your support means a lot to me and helps me create more fun and useful content for you. Now I have stitched the fabrics together and it's time to measure the circumference of the coaster. This is important because we will need to cut the lining fabric to fit perfectly around the coaster for a finished look. I used the same fabric as the backing fabric for the bias binding to maintain a cohesive look. I measured the fabric piece to match the length of the circular circumference of the coaster and then prepared it to create the bias binding. Please note that creating this coaster requires a bit more advanced sewing skills, including the techniques for making bias binding tape and properly attaching it to the circumference of the coaster. These steps may take some time and practice, but once you get hang of them, you'll be able to achieve a clean and professional look for your project. Here I am preparing the bias binding tape using the fabric. Since I don't have a single strip that is enough to match the circumference of the coaster, I'll need to attach two fabric strips together to create the desired length. This will allow me to go all the way around the coaster smoothly and ensure a proper fit. Once I have the long fabric strip ready, I'll take it to the iron and press it by first folding it in half lengthwise. Then I'll fold it into another half again to create a narrower strip. This double fold will help me identify the sewing line when attaching the bias binding to the coaster. Now it's time to sew the binding fabric to the coaster along the circumference. For this, I don't use any pins, but I stitch very slowly, carefully keeping the binding at the edges of the coaster. I make sure to leave about a half inch of seam allowance as I go around, ensuring a neat and consistent finish as I attach the binding to the coaster. And our zero waste fabric scrap coaster is ready. Please feel free to comment below and share your thoughts on how it turned out. And I hope that you liked my creation. I'll see you all in my next video. Until then, stay curious and keep learning.